the state of Texas versus Althea Johnson, you will a true verdict render according to the law and the evidence, so help you God. All right, thank you. You may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to give you the order of the proceedings today. So what's going to happen is, in a moment, the state's attorney will read the indictment, and Ms. Johnson will enter a plea to the indictment, or she doesn't have to. She could also stand accused if she wishes. And then the court will enter a not guilty plea on her behalf. So that's just common practice. And then after that, you will hear opening statements from the parties. The defense can, if they wish, to waive their opening statement until their case in chief. It just depends on whatever they decide is best at the time. So, but in a moment you will hear that. I want to remind you about opening statements, as they are not evidence, but merely a statement from either party as to what they believe the evidence will show in the case. So with that, Ms. Falk.
The state of Texas versus Althea Johnson. Indictment. Count 1, abandon a child, imminent danger, second-degree felony. In the 390th Judicial District of Travis County, Texas. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas. The grand jury for the County of Travis, State of Texas, duly selected, impaneled, sworn, charged, and organized as such at the July term 2017 of the 390th Judicial District for said county, upon its oath presents and into said court at said term that Althea Johnson, on or about the 25th day of October 2017, and before the presentment of this indictment in the County of Travis and State of Texas, did then and there, being the mother of Leilani Johnson and having a legal or statutory duty to act, or having custody, care, or control of the said Leilani Johnson, a child younger than 15 years of age, intentionally abandoned the said Leilani Johnson at a place, namely in a dumpster or a waste receptacle, under circumstances that a reasonable person would believe would place the child in imminent danger of death, bodily injury, or physical or mental impairment. To wit, the said Althea Johnson left the said Leilani Johnson in a dumpster or waste receptacle without proper supervision, and the said Althea Johnson did not voluntarily deliver the child to a designated emergency infant care provider under section 262-302 of the Family Code, against the peace and dignity of the state, signed by the foreperson of the grand jury.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. The plaintiff, please stand. Ms. Johnson, to the single count of the indictment as read by the state's attorney, how do you plead, ma'am, guilty or not guilty?
Your Honor, pursuant to section 2612 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, Ms. Johnson would stand silent as to her plea.
All right, thank you, Ms. Chacon. A not guilty plea will be entered on behalf of the defendant. You may be seated. Thank you. All right, Ms. Morgan, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Counsel, Your Honor, members of the jury. The evidence in this case will show that Althea Johnson concealed her pregnancy. She didn't want anyone to know. In the early hours of a cold October morning, she gave birth alone in her bathroom. She knew the baby was alive. She saw her eyes open, saw her mouth open. But before she could make a sound, before she cried, Althea Johnson got one of her dresses and wrapped her up and took her outside. She made the choice to start walking. And with each step, she chose to go towards the dumpster. All the while, drip, 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 leaving a trail of blood from her apartment to the dumpster. She discarded her child, abandoned her newborn baby in a trash dumpster, threw her away with the trash of last night's pizza boxes. It was cold that morning in the Althea Johnson went back inside her apartment. In her apartment, everyone was still asleep. Her brother Kendall, her boyfriend Xavier, her roommates, a couple who occupied the second bedroom, Callie and Gilbert, with their young son Silas, and her own 3 children. 3 girls, ages 8, 7, and 2. Althea Johnson showered. She cleaned up the bathroom where she gave birth, and she threw her bloody clothes in the trash can. The evidence will show that on that morning, while it was still dark, a man named Dwayne Bowie was also in the apartment complex. Mr. Bowie looks for trash finds, things he could find in the trash to sell. He walked up to a dumpster, and as he was shifting through the trash, he heard a sound. He looked, and he thought it was a doll. He moved the trash and saw a baby's body. He yelled for help, and he called 911. Fire Station 23 was less than a mile down the road, with a bright yellow sign, a safe haven. You'll hear evidence that while it was still dark, firefighters pulled Althea Johnson's baby out of the dumpster. And with EMS paramedics, they performed life-saving measures. You'll hear from those first responders and what they did to save that baby girl's life. You also hear and hear about DNA evidence that proves the baby was the child of Althea Johnson. At the end of this case, the state will ask you to find the defendant, in this case, Althea Johnson, guilty of abandoning a child, imminent danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Thank you.
Mr. Cohen?
Thank you, Your Honor. Counsel? Good morning. So Ms. Morgan just told you about all of the dark and disturbing things that she expects that you will hear about in this case. And although Leilani is alive and doing well, there is no doubt that this case is disturbing. But she's only told you half of the story. As the week progresses, you will hear that in most ways, Althea Johnson is just an average woman, struggling to do the best she can for her family. You'll hear that her father was in the Army, and her young mother struggled with depression. So at an early age, Althea took on the responsibility of helping to raise her siblings. And she learned very early on that you do whatever you have to take care of your family, and no one has time to hear you complain. You'll hear that in high school, Althea was actually a nationally ranked athlete with aspirations toward college. But life doesn't always unfold the way we plan, and Althea struggled with her own depression and a series of trauma. On October 25th, 2017, Althea was living here in Austin with her 3 children, as Ms. Morgan mentioned. Maple and Thoria was 8, Layla was 7, and Lyric was actually a little over 1. Day in and day out, Althea was not just showing up, but she was loving and parenting her girls. She was helping with homework, she was kissing scraped knees, she was feeding and clothing and supporting the entire family. You'll hear that she moved here at the insistence of her abusive ex-boyfriend, Xavier Swanson. She was far away and isolated from her family and her support system, and she was working 2 jobs that paid her less money in total than any previous position she had held. But she did what she needed to do to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. The evidence will show that every morning at about 4 a.m., Althea was up, doing hair, feeding everyone, and making sure everyone was ready to go when she left the house to walk 5 miles to her first job. She was working as a cook and then a housekeeper at the Sleep Inn. You'll hear that by the time she got home, she had just enough time to feed everyone again, catch up on their day, and maybe help with homework, any other things that needed to be done before she had to get ready and head out to her second job. If she was lucky, she got a quick bite to eat before the crowd started rolling in, and she worked as a server at Applebee's. So depending on the crowd, she would get home somewhere between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. She'd make a bottle for Lyric, and she would sleep for between an hour and an hour and a half each day before she got up and did the same thing over again. And she did that 6 days a week without complaint. You will hear that she did this day after day, month after month, and by October of 2017, the people closest to her will tell you that they saw that it was starting to take a toll. And to add insult to injury, in walks Xavier Swanson. You will hear that he wasn't supposed to be there, and she didn't want him there, but he was back in their lives, and he was back in the apartment. And the people will tell you that the cracks soon began to show. You'll hear that Althea had taken in her brother and 2 roommates with their child to help her watch the children and to defray expenses. So on the night in question, when Leilani was born, there were 5 adults and 4 children living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. And you will hear that when Althea Johnson unexpectedly gave birth, not a single person heard a sound or saw a thing. And I'm going to repeat that because Althea Johnson unexpectedly gave birth because she did not know that she was pregnant. And ladies, I know that is hard to believe, but I expect you will hear expert testimony to tell you that not only is that possible, but it's not as uncommon as you would think. And for Ms. Johnson, it wasn't the exception, but rather the rule. As the DA told you, the evidence in this case will show that Leilani was thankfully alive and is thriving. And she also laid out for you what she expects will be the evidence to tell you how and why this happened. And this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you the same. And I'll promise you that there are people out there that would pay cash money to hear what I'm about to tell you anywhere outside these 4 walls. I don't know. And we don't know because what happened that night in that bathroom and how Leilani got to the dumpster was so traumatic that Althea cannot recall it. I think that the evidence will show that her mind is actually shielding her from these memories.
Your Honor, I'm gonna object. May we approach?
Yes. ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I will just remind you that what the lawyers say in opening statement is not evidence, but merely what they believe that the evidence will show. This evidence that you will receive will come from the witness stand and physical evidence that is admitted by the court. Thank you.
I expect that the evidence in this case will show that it is very unlikely that Althea Johnson consciously and intentionally raised her child.
Your Honor, objection.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. In a dumpster. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
So what the DA didn't mention is that following the discovery of Leilani, after the investigation, you will hear that Ms. Johnson voluntarily gave statements to both CPS and to APB. But you will also hear that while her mind was still grappling with accepting that she had just given birth and could not recall it, she was told that Leilani was hers. And she was told that the police had proof of this. You will hear that even though she felt to her core that it was impossible for her to do such a thing, that she accepted what they told her, and she tried to take responsibility for it. She is still prepared to accept the consequences if you find her responsible. But she does not recall the events of the birth itself. I am confident that once you hear all of the circumstances surrounding how and why she gave the statements that she did, and you see the actual evidence in this case, that you won't believe that she consciously abandoned her child. And I know that you'll have reasonable doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Connell. Does either party wish to have a ruling vote at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, the rule has been invoked. If there are any witnesses that are in the courtroom today, please exit. I don't see any, so State, you may call your first witness. Oh, that, yeah, he's shutting down.